Welcome back to the Almost Unbelievable YouTube channel with me, Ranty. Thank you very much for stopping by. Now, today's story involves an entire town taking retaliation against just one individual, one man who had terrorized their community for the past 2 decades. You see, the justice system had failed them, but they weren't going to fail their community. Let's get into the murder of Kem Mcelroy, who died in 1981. Now, Ken was born in 1934 in Skidmore, Missouri. His parents were Tony and Mabel, and they rented a farm in Skidmore and worked the land. Whilst there, they had 16 children. Ken was the 15th of those children. Now, Ken was always a naughty child. He'd always been up to mischief, and this one time he went into a grocery store and he decided to rob it. Whilst he was robbing it, he was caught, and instead of his father defending the grocery store owner, he actually threatened the grocery store owner instead. And Ken, having seen this, realised that this was probably a very good way to get out of being in trouble. Being aggressive, being angry, and being threatening. And in doing so, he got away with stealing from the shop. And the memory of that stayed with Ken for the rest of his life. And he would use that in the coming decades to terrorise the town from which he had been born. Now, in 1952, Ken married his first wife, Oleta. The two of them stayed in Missouri for a short time and then bounced around in different locations where Ken actually got employed. However, an accident at work meant that he had to return back to Skidmore, and this is where everything changed for the town. Now, just some of the felonies that Ken was accused of include assault, child molestation, statutory rape, arson, animal cruelty, hog and cattle rustling, and burglary. And the reason why he got away with most of these crimes was because he would intimidate the victims of those crimes. He would harass them, he would go around to their house, he would stalk them, he would do anything to get them to drop their charges, and more often than not, that's exactly what happened. And if that failed to work, he could always bring in his lawyer, who also was a lawyer for the mob, called Richard Gene McFadden. Now, back in those days, we all know, if you're connected, you're connected. And this is how he got away with the crimes that he did. Now, when Ken was 18, he had married Oleta when she was only 16. In 1958, when Ken was still married to Oleta, he met a young girl called Sharon. She would have been 14 at the time, and they started a relationship. In 1959, one day whilst they were in the car, he pulled out a shotgun and held it to her face and told her, "If you don't shut up, I'm going to blow your head off." Now, of course, the 15-year-old girl at this time is incredibly distressed, and we don't know what actually transpired thereafter, but what we do know is that the gun went off, and Sharon was struck in the chin and the neck, and she was taken to hospital. Now, to avoid getting any charges, Ken decided that he would have a chat to his wife, Oleta, beg her for a divorce so that he could marry Sharon and have her be his wife, and in doing so, avoid the charges that would inevitably come his way. Oleta agreed to the deal, and Sharon and Ken got married, and in 1960, when Sharon was just 16 years of age, she gave birth to a little boy. So with Oleta divorced and out of the way, and he is now married to his 16-year-old bride Sharon, and they now have a child called Jerome together, Ken wasn't satisfied. You see, he had eyes for another young girl in the town, an even younger girl than Sharon. And that girl was called Sally. And he won her over, and he brought her back to live in the same house with Sharon. And over the next few years, they had many children together. Fast forward a few years to 1964, and Ken spots another girl in the street called Alice Woods. He talks to her, he chats her up, he wins her over, and he kicks Sharon out of his life. Shortly after, he also kicks Sally out of his life, and now he just has the one woman in his life called Alice. Now Alice goes on to marry Ken, and they're relatively happy for a few years until in 1969 when Ken sees another girl in the street called Trina Williams. Now at this time Ken is 35 years of age and Trina is only 12 years of age. He goes up to her, he talks to her, he wins her over, and they start a relationship together. At the age of 14, she becomes pregnant, and the whole town now knows who the father is. Now, to avoid charges of child rape or statutory rape, Ken talks to his wife Alice and begs her to divorce him. She does, and now the pathway is clear for Ken to marry Trina, who at this time was 14. Now Trina's family are clearly none too happy with this arrangement, and they object and say they will not allow Trina to marry Ken. What does Ken do? He goes around to the parents' house and he burns it down. And whilst he's there, for good measure, he shoots their dog. Not long after, Trina's parents relent and the pathway is clear, and now Ken marries Trina. So now the family dynamic in the Ken household is that he has his ex-wife Alice still living with him, and he has his new wife Trina living with him. Now Trina, she gives birth at the age of 14. She gives birth, and 16 days later, both Alice and Trina, they flee. We don't know why, but they leave, they go, they escape from Ken. Something happened, we don't know what. But they fled and they went to Trina's new parents' house that they had to move into because their last one had been burned down. And they move into the parents' home and they stay there for a while. Sometime afterwards, Ken tracks them down and he forces them to come back with him, including the child, and they all move back to Ken's. A short time after that, Trina's parents go away for a holiday vacation, and whilst they're away, Ken decides to pop around and pay their new house a visit. And he goes around and he sets fire to it again, and he also kills their new dog. This man is crazy. Oh, and just quickly, if you haven't subscribed yet and you like this kind of story, please subscribe. It really would be appreciated. It's been alleged that in 1976, a local man called Boone Helm was shot by Ken in the leg, although he was never charged with that. However, on July the 27th of that same year, 1976, a local man called Romain Henry, who had a farm there, saw Ken on his property. He went over to challenge him and say, "Hey, why are you shooting on my property?" And Ken turned around and shot him twice in the stomach. McElroy was charged with assault with intent to kill, a charge that wouldn't stick because when they went to court, out of the blue, two raccoon hunters turned up, spoke up for Ken and said that they were with him at the time, giving him an alibi, essentially letting him off the hook yet again. Fast forward a few years, and in April of 1980, Ken's children go into the local grocery store. Inside of the store was a lady called Lois Bowenkamp, and she was married to the owner of the store, Bo. Now, while she's there, she notices the children stealing some of their items, and she reports it. Of course, Ken isn't too happy about this, and he's not angry with his children, he's angry with Lois and the Bowenkamp family. And he starts a feud with them, one that will result in an altercation in the back of the store where he pulls a shotgun onto Bo, a 70-year-old man, and he shoots him in the neck. Now, the new prosecutor at the time, knowing how often Ken had got away with all these previous charges, decided to drop the threshold of the crime, and he decided to charge him not with attempt to kill, but to knowingly cause serious physical injury. And this worked, because Ken got 2 years in jail for this. Finally, he got some comeuppance for his crimes. But it doesn't go that easy. You see, he immediately appeals, and as so, he's released on bail. And when he's released on bail, he's now very angry. Ken was quoted as saying, after the conviction, "The jury convicted me, and they gave me 2 years. But I'll tell you what, I'll never go to jail. I'll appeal, and I'll get off. I've been fighting the law since I was 13, and I'm damn near 50. I've been arrested for over 53 felonies, and this is the first one I have ever lost." At this time, Ken is absolutely thinking that he's invulnerable to anything that anybody can throw at him. And a few days later, he walks into the local tavern, the D&G Tavern in Skidmore, and he walks in with a rifle and a bayonet. He sits down at a table and he's having a few drinks, and the more he drinks, the more he starts to speak. And the more he's talking, people are realizing that somebody is going to be in trouble, because his anger is directed at Bo, and he's talking about killing him. A local resident overhears this, phones up the police come, and they arrest him. They take him back to the cells. He's took there because he breached his bail conditions by carrying a weapon. Except the very next day, he's out again. What a surprise. Shortly after this incident, a town hall meeting was called, and in attendance was the local mayor and the local sheriff. It was also attended by over 40 local residents who wanted answers. They wanted to know why this man, who had been around their community for the past 2 decades, had been creating all of these problems and all of this crime, and yet he always seemed to get away with it. They wanted to know why the justice system and the police continually let them down. And they weren't going to stop at words anymore. They were going to take matters into their own hands. And it just so happens that at the time the meeting was wrapping up, Ken and his wife Trina would be pulling up outside the tavern. They went into the tavern, they ordered some drinks, and they sat down together. A local resident that was inside of the tavern at the time, and knowing that there was a meeting just across the road to discuss Ken, decided to leave the tavern and go across and just tell people, randomly for no reason, that Ken was in the tavern. The local residents didn't take long to leave the town hall, walk across the road, and surround the car that was parked outside. Several of the people that had been in attendance at the meeting also went into the tavern, and they walked in and they just stood there, silent, looking at him. Ken, feeling unnerved, decided it was better to leave, so he and Trina drank their drinks, they got up, they made their way to the car, they let themselves in. Ken lit up a cigarette, and that was the last thing he remembers. Because all hell was breaking loose. Gunshots were coming from all over, and in just a matter of seconds, Ken lay dead in the driver's seat of the car, and Trina had escaped out of the passenger side and fled towards a local bank. The sheriff, who had been at the town hall meeting, decided to recuse himself from the investigation, and police from neighbouring counties came in to investigate. In total, they investigated hundreds of people, and yet nobody, not one single person, ever admitted to the crime. Now, at that time in Skidmore, the population was just 588, and in the vicinity at the time was an estimated 60 people. 60 potential witnesses who could have said something, but nobody said a word. Everybody kept stum. Until this day, not a single person has ever been charged with the murder of Kem Mcelroy. In relation to the investigation, Cheryl Houston, who was Bo Bowenkemp's daughter, was quoted as saying this: "Once the shroud of silence fell, there was going to be no one talking. They could have pushed and dug, and gotten nothing. We were so bitter and so angry at the law letting us down that it came to somebody taking matters in their own hand. No one has any idea what a nightmare we lived." Now, I've just given a brief description of some of the crimes that he was alleged to have committed. Of course, there are a lot more of them out there if you want to do the research yourself. In the meantime, I hope this story has been of interest to you, and I'll see you all in the next one.